Welcome to our Web Extra. Our in-depth coverage continues now on this distance learning divide. Thank you for watching on Fox Providence. We were talking with Superintendent Harris, Peter, on the whole idea of a virtual academy and how hundreds of families have already signed up for that. Talk about a little bit more of why families are engaged in doing that.
Yeah, we've heard loud and clear from many of our communities that for some reason, for whatever reason, it could be a student or a child that has a medical condition that prohibits them. They may be more susceptible to contracting COVID. There may be a family member. Many of our students live in multi-generational homes, so they're concerned about maybe parents of the older generation. Whatever reason, they wanted a completely online option, and we've been able to start to plan for that. But then also shared that still about 3/4 of our families have not signed up for the virtual learning academy, which is a loud and clear statement that in some shape or form, they want to come back to in-person learning. So we want to be able to provide both choices for our families.
And you're hearing a lot about that in all the different communities. Courtney?
Thank you, Mike. Well, Mr. Pierce, I'm going to ask you another question. I'm a parent of a 7-year-old who did distance learning in the spring myself, and I'm concerned about the mental health component. I know the governor did a Facebook video on this about a week to two ago. What are your concerns, if you have any, on the mental health component? And do you think, on the contrary, there are any positives besides the safety aspect to distance learning?
So I want to double click on a comment that the commissioner made. When we first went to this whole distance learning construct in the spring, it really sort of exposed the naked underbelly of a district and just really exacerbated the inequities that education has done for many students of color. Being in the pandemic, also when you think about the social ills that Dr. Hall and Mr. Benson talked about that many of our students of poverty sort of live in, your social emotional health and wellness is always the top of mind. And we acknowledge that. And we've got a plan for that. What you'll hear is that the first 5 days of school, teachers will have very scripted and pre-scripted social emotional learning lesson plans from grades kindergarten all the way through 12. These are mandatory lesson plans that we work with our partner, the New Teaching Project, and with our teachers to develop, because we know kids are still hurting. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. We want them to know that, hey, we missed them. We're going to try to rebuild community, but we want to acknowledge that many of our families are struggling. So those first 5 days will be directly centered upon facilitating those social emotional learning lessons for those students. Not that it's going to end at the first 5 days, but we wanted to be very intentional around building community once students transition back to us.
Okay, so it sounds like their mental health is being looked at and was well thought out in terms of your plan you mentioned.
Yes.
Thank you. Mike?
Commissioner, we're talking a little bit about mental health. Let's talk a little bit about sports and how important it is. Obviously, for kids, some of that is all their socialization. We know they're probably not going to go to the NBA, Major League Baseball, but for them, that's important. We saw the sports canceled in the spring. Now there's still no decision made right now in Rhode Island. Talk a little bit about that, how hard superintendents and your office is working to get the kids back on the field.
Yes, so there has been, there was a conversation and a decision made about what sports can start, non-contact sports. There have been some little leagues that have been playing in the summer, track and field, those kinds of things will continue to be in place. And I think they're going to work with local districts to make sure that those non-contact sports can continue to move on and we'll see what the numbers show as we move forward. But it's going to have to be the same kids in the same group. So there's a lot of work that needs to happen because we do understand how important it is. It is part of the identity of being part of a school for many kids.
Is it going to matter, Commissioner, if, let's say, we're just taking these schools, for example, let's say Cranston decides to go back, but Warwick is going to do distance learning. Will the Cranston schools not play the schools in Warwick because they're not going back? Has that decision been made, looked at all yet?
Well, of course. Well, if they're not coming back, it would stand to reason that they wouldn't have sports, right? Because if they can't come back in person, then they can't have sports in person. That to me seems very logical. So they've made a tough decision early on, and it impacts everyone.
That's a decision I think some of the athletes would not like to hear. I think they all want to get back on the field. Courtney?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mike. Dr. Hollis, is for you. What do you think can be done to bridge that gap that's happening between, let's say, lower income families, that technology gap that we spoke about earlier? What do you think can be done?
Yeah, thank you, Courtney, for the question. I think we have to be serious, right? What we're talking about is reinvestment, right? You know, there's this conversation around policing, Courtney, about reimagining. We have to reimagine education. We cannot continue the status quo. Clearly, it wasn't working before, right? And I don't think it will work after COVID. So the answer to that is we have to reimagine education, and we have to reinvest in our children, right? And that reinvestment, right, is not only just more money, it's where we put those dollars. So earlier, President Benson talked about mentorship. It's not just about mentorship. We have to look at how many teachers of color we have. Are we hiring teachers of color? Are we promoting teachers of color? Are we retaining teachers of color? Are we making sure that there's professional development, right? Because during the school day, if our kids are not seeing teachers that look like them, that is a problem. If we're not looking at the disciplinary structures and policies that are put in place, that is a problem. So it's not only about a reinvestment in dollars, it's looking at a philosophy moving forward. We have to have a paradigm shift, right? And we have to begin to have a holistic approach to how we work with our children. And I also want to touch on something that's important. We talk about mental health. Poverty equates to trauma. When you have students who are living in poverty day in and day out, and we know that because many of our children, right, we know are getting their food, right, from schools. When you look at the city of New Bedford was packing lunches and breakfast for children, right? So the reality is that we have a serious issue that we have to begin to reimagine this work and be very strategic in how we're going to go about solving these problems, right? We have to be innovative enough to say, okay, the things that didn't work in the past, we can't do. And we have to be very real, Courtney, that there are people that are exploiting COVID-19. When you look at some of the private schools and some of the parochial schools, they're able to hire teachers, they're able to hire the nurses, they're able to hire mental health counselors, right? Because they have the dollars to do so. So we have to begin to address all those inequities.
Thank you, Dr. Hall.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
Because I think that we're right on there. One of the first things I did when I came to the state is started this educators of color statewide to address some of the issues that we're faced with teachers of color feeling invisible in our system, right? Feeling like they're not being heard or being taken seriously. And we have a working group now statewide, the entire state, where we are asking for certain things to change within our system to be able to retain teachers, to attract teachers. And then Harrison, I'd like you to talk a little bit about your TAP and the things that you're doing, because I think that he's got it as a metric, and it's important for people to know that.
We believe what gets monitored gets done, and we've heard the community loud and clear. We've got nearly north of 85% students of color, but that same percentage of teachers that are white teachers. Not that white teachers can't be effective teachers, many of them are. But we also know the value in having a workforce that reflects the students that you serve. There's power in that. And research supports the fact that even white students do better having had taught by a teacher of color. So we've stood that up in our turnaround action plan, where we are going to aggressively go after hiring quality candidates of color. And that's also me as superintendent modeling that with my own leadership team. Do I have a leadership team that's reflective of the district? So we called it out, and we're unapologetic like that. And we unapologetic about that. And we want to make sure that we lead with that emphasis on building, retaining, supporting a diverse workforce, because we know that's what's also good for kids.
Right. If I could, Courtney, I want to follow up, right? And I agree with Mr. Peters in that we certainly want quality teachers of color, but the NAACP wants quality teachers across the board, right? The reality is we not only want quality, but we want compassionate, right? The idea is that we want compassionate teachers. We want teachers that have empathy. We want teachers that care, right? But the reality is, right, there is problems when students look at the front of the classroom, right, from K through 12, and they don't see people that look like them, right? That is problematic. The other discussion that the NAACP, I think, is clear on is that we have to continue to diversify our curriculum, right? When we talk about including Indigenous studies, Native American studies, when we talk about including Black studies, these things are essential so that our children get the truth, right? Not only are we in the middle of COVID, Courtney and Mike, we're in the middle of racial tensions where people are getting hurt, and where our students, as Mr. Peters knows, our students are going to come back to this. When our students come back to school, Courtney, they're putting everything inside that classroom. They're bringing their emotions, they're bringing their experiences, they're bringing their hurts, they're bringing that pain. And so before we even talk about, getting to the education part, we have to make sure our children are okay and that we have plans in place to support that. And so I just wanted to put that out there because those things are essential in terms of how we're moving forward. And that's why I'm saying we have to really reimagine education.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. So it sounds like looking at the full aspect or full well-being of the child, as well as children of any color, seeing themselves reflected in the education system, whether that's through a teacher or through studies.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And engaging. I didn't mean to cut you off, Jim. I'm sorry.
Great. No, I'm just going to reiterate. I was going to support what you just said. I think the number one issue in public schools in Rhode Island, public school system that's nearly 50% of color today, not in 20 years, but today, is the lack of teachers of color. That to me is the number one issue affecting public schools in the districts as well as the state at large. So I think that, if you're going to see any kind of demonstrable change, you're not going to see it until you have teachers that are of color and other teachers who are culturally sensitive, because without that, nothing's going to change the needle or make the public school systems here any better than they have been. So I support everything that has been said.
Right, and we can't lay this at the hands of K through 12. I want to be very serious. It's also looking at how we are educating teachers. When you have entire universities and colleges where teachers can get a degree in education and they haven't had to take any multicultural education classes, they haven't had to take any diversity classes, right? There's a problem with that. So we can't expect teachers to come out of school and understand children who may be from a different background when they haven't been challenged as well. This thing is holistic, right? So we can't just say, okay, well, K through 12, you're down there by yourself. We have to also begin to reimagine higher education when they're preparing these teachers to make sure that they are equipping these teachers to have compassion, to get the truth about how to work with young people who are different from them, how to work with parents who may be different from them. When you talk about the language divide, right? That's essential. And so I'm saying this because we've got to get serious about how we're all working in community, Courtney and Mike, right? Like, how do we expand what community looks like? It can't just be you're in this suburb of Cranston, right? And I'm in the city of Providence or New Bedford or Dartmouth. We have to be serious because all of our children are working together. And so they have to learn how to work together when they graduate from high school, when they graduate from college, and they go on to jobs, wherever their dreams may be, that they know how to work with people who don't look like them. They're not going to have those skills when they're hired, right? So they have to be taught those things prior to.
Thank you all for your answers. Mike?
I guess we can, all of you can jump in on this one. So, teachers down the line are going to retire. How do we look at high school kids of color and to convince them, to show them the education field is a wonderful field to work in? How do we do that?
By having professionals that are in the field, as well as administrators and people like Superintendent Peters and Commissioner Alfonte Green, talk to them. When they see themselves in them, they'll be inspired. Trust me. You can't see something that you never saw, but when you see people that are in those professions and how impressive they are, that's how you inspire young people. That's the connection.
Superintendent?
I agree. We are in the middle of a study. There's a study called the Opportunity Myth that was published by the New Teacher Project. And they did a study across the country, 5 school districts, looked at a ton of classrooms. And what they realized is that students of color disproportionately did not get grade level work, at attuned to 14% compared to 73% of their white counterparts. So our students, in order to feed the pipeline of teachers of color, students have to have a positive K-12 experience themselves. And I believe that's where our work, when I say our work, everybody on the screen, is cut out. We have to provide a pre-K-12 experience for all students, but especially kids of color, if we want to feed that pipeline. Because right now, I mean, when you look across the country, teaching is no longer sexy anymore. So we've got to figure out, how do we change the narrative? To Dr. LaSalle's, to Dr. Hall's point, how do we change the whole paradigm of how we do education? Going back to where we were is simply not an option. So I think, again, as Mr. Vincent said, having people that look like students that they can value and see in front of them in schools, but providing that experience where they feel as if there's a culture and a climate in that building where they feel loved, appreciated, where high expectations, where we refuse to let you fail, and we're gonna put our arms around you and make sure that we supply you with everything that you need to be successful.
Well, we're running out of time, but we do appreciate all of you taking your time to talk about this important issue. As we're taping this in August, obviously this is a very fluid situation and things will change. Stay tuned to WPRI and WPRI.com for updates. But again, all of you, thank you very much, and thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.